structure. It's time structure. Not random. Sorry? Well, that's right, yes. Yeah. And then it's completely on its side, so that you get this, it goes from a shallow angle and then vertical.
Here and the top, it's much more red.
A friend of my son called Louise Stuart Canada, and they made a record called Song 68. It's on the record.
You want the lights, I think, don't you? Hello, everybody. So I'm very pleased to have Malcom Le Grice with us today. For me, it's okay. Ah, yes, you can switch on the light. Felix, the power switch. Yeah. So, as you see, Malcom is a great experimental film and video artist. And many of you know him also because he's an incredible writer about media art. Indeed, Malcom started as an artist in the 60s. And he was one of the first in the UK to use a computer. Indeed, early 70s, he worked with the Atlas computer, which was part of the defense department used for the atomic research. And so he was one of the first artists to be able to work with this, and he produced one of the very first abstract movie on film at that time, but made with a computer. He also did some digital works, computer programming works with. Heading the film and media department in various art schools, such as St. Martin's College.
Yeah.
Well, you know him, huh? And he was also teaching at Transmedia.
Right.
So, Malcom, it's up to you. So he's going to make a lecture, and then of course we have a debate, question, and so on. Everything is streamed online, and so the archive will be available in a few days. Malcom, thanks a lot.
Okay. Let me put my glasses on so I can see what I'm doing. Right. So, this seats here. I've got to take the microphone.
Yeah, take this one.
I'm not very good at sitting down. There's plenty of seats here, and I have to start with a number of apologies. One is I speak English, and like all English people, I'm not very good at languages. I can understand a bit of French, and I even now, after years of coming to Brussels, understand a little Flemish, but not really enough. So it's in English. The second apology is that I promised myself that I would never read my lecture. Well, I'm going to break that, and I will be reading some things, so that's the second apology. The third apology is that I hate PowerPoint, and I'm going to do part of the presentation in PowerPoint. So that's the third apology. And the fourth apology is that it's going to be a little bit academic. It's going to look at the history of things, and the subject is about the Spectator and its relation to art, science, and technology. I really don't know quite where it's going, and I never really fully believe anything that I say. Okay, I'm always very doubtful about everything. So sometimes it sounds like I'm sure of things, but I'm not. I'm never really sure of things, but I try and get things as clear as I can. And I don't know quite where this started, but I was invited to make this lecture because the people who were involved in the exhibition here thought that some of the thoughts that I had related to what they're doing, and maybe they do and maybe they don't. The other thing is that iMAL is really an art and technology environment, and I've done a lot of thought about art and technology, and I've done a lot of experiments myself that involve being stimulated by possibilities in technology. But also, I want to say that in some ways, I don't think the technology matters. You know, we spend a lot of time thinking about the technology and invention in technology, but I'm not sure that it matters so much. A very good friend of mine, who's, I think, an extremely good filmmaker, called Peter Goodall. For years I've been involved in what has come to be called expanded cinema. The piece you just saw, well, normally I would be doing that in a gallery, in an exhibition space, and each screen would be separate and it would be enormous. And so expanded cinema was also about spectacle. And my friend said, I don't know about expanded cinema. He said, if you're a good artist, you could make work that was really important with just using matchsticks. It doesn't have to be with high technology, and I think to some extent I agree with him. Okay, so let's see if I can. Okay, yeah, it starts a little bit from I think there's been a lot of confusion going on in the last 10 years or more about the relationship between art and science. And so I thought I'd start off. I told you it was going to be a bit boring and academic. I thought I'd start off by trying to define the differences between science, technology, and art, because most of the things which are talked about as being relationships between science and art, for me, are not. There's almost, we'll come to that in a minute. So what is science? Science, it tells you here, science is a structured form of inquiry. It looks at things in the natural world. It records them and tries to find principles that underlie those phenomena, right? And those principles are tested by whether they can predict what's going to happen in the natural world, in the phenomena. And that's the test. And it's very structured, and it leads to knowledge. Now, I don't really know whether I've got this right or not, but in Europe, science is often called something that relates to knowledge, which is, but science is not the same thing as knowledge. Knowledge is a byproduct of science. Science itself is a process of inquiry, and it's a structured process of inquiry. So that's science. Oh, wrong way. This is a good start. Technology. Technology is a development from tool making. You can be an inventive technologist without having any real understanding of the underlying scientific principles. It may help to have that understanding, but you don't have to have it. All the early technology, you know, things to do with the spiral that brought water up from the Nile, those things were not based on any understanding of the scientific aspect of that. They were simply based on the fact that if you try this and try that, something will happen. And technology, technologies can be invented without any real understanding of scientific principles. And I suspect many of them are. And technologists are inventors. They're inventors, and they may understand the science, but they don't have to. So they're inventors. I wonder if I'll get this right this time. Art. Now this is the more difficult bit. Art functions in the minds of people, in their cultural environment. It doesn't do any useful work It doesn't have to be true or false. It doesn't need to be tested. And let me say, as an artist, I don't have, I mean, I do a lot of theoretical work, but I never make my artwork to follow the theory. If there's any theoretical reflection, it follows the art practice. And the art practice is very intuitive. Now, what does intuitive mean? It means that actually we're very complicated beings with, and our minds work processing a huge range of material in a very fast way that we don't necessarily, lots of it's unconscious. And so when I work as an artist, I have a sort of half idea. I'll do this, I look at it and I think that's interesting, and then I'll follow that up and invent something else. But it doesn't actually begin from idea. And as I've developed as an artist, I've got increasingly more and more against ideas. Because for me, ideas, once you've got the idea of something, it kind of destroys the experience. And I'm much more interested in art as experience than I am with art as idea. Again, I warn you not to believe anything that I say. How do the fields interact? Science and technology, art and science, art and technology. Those are the three main areas. Okay, science and technology is fairly simple. Technology contributes to science by improving devices for exploring the world. Microscopes, electron microscopes, all kinds of devices. The technology is used for improving scientific instrumentation and so on. On the other side, there's a feedback from science, which improves, that's the wrong word, that leads to sophisticated technological developments. I mean, I've got this one in my pocket, the mobile telephone with a camera and all sorts of stuff. Now, those couldn't be invented as a technology without the kind of developments in science. So the feedback from science means that there's ever more sophisticated technologies. So that interrelationship is fairly straightforward. Okay, art and science. Now this, as I said just now, a lot of what we think of or been presented to us as being art and science relationships, on the whole aren't. I think that on the whole, most of those things are actually art and technology relationships. But I wanted to have a look at two cases. Art that's influenced by science and art that's employing a scientific process, right? Those are the two cases that again, they may not be the only two cases. You might be able to think of other ones. Case one. We know that a lot of art can draw on and be stimulated by scientific information, scientific knowledge. And the obvious early example of this in the beginning of the end of the 19th century, late 1800s, the Impressionists were influenced by, stimulated by the beginnings of color theories. And Michel Chevreul, my wife told me off because I can't pronounce it properly, so you might get it better. Chevreul, doesn't matter. Anyway, so this was an influence from one example of influence. And here, obvious, again, none of this is world-shattering. It's the obvious thing. Georges Seurat was clearly influenced by color theories of the day, and particularly in this approach to pointillism, the idea that color mixes from its pure forms in the eye to form other colors. But he's an example of someone who was influenced by science, but was never involved in any kind of scientific process. He was influenced by, and it produced extremely interesting artworks, many of aspects of which are nothing to do with the technique of pointillism. They're more to do with, the picture that we've got of these bathers, and so the art has always these multi-layered sets of meaning, and you can't feel that the meaning is about the pointillism. But it stimulated Seurat into producing some very interesting work, and also formed a basis for some very new ideas about landscape and about color relationships. Now here's another example, one of my favorite, Claude Monet, and I'll come back to it in a moment. If you don't know, Claude Monet did this series of Rouen Cathedral. And this is only 3 of, I don't know how many, something like 20 studies of Rouen Cathedral in different lighting conditions. Now, Monet, in the discussions at the time, said he wasn't influenced by science at all, right? He denied that his work had anything to do with science. We'll come back to that in a minute. So he wasn't, according to him, directly influenced by color theory. Of course, indirectly, I think he was. This is me. This is a painting that I did in 1964. And I was very interested in genetics, in string theory, in connectivities, and I used diagrammatic forms, again influenced by science. I was I was reading. I kept up to date as well as I could on genetic theory and communication theory and so on. I was interested in it, and when I was painting, it's not that I was illustrating the theory. I wasn't. I was just the sorts of forms that I was making as a sort of support for saying, why is that an interesting idea? I was reading all the scientific theory. Okay. Okay, art and science, scientific process. Very difficult, this one. And I've thought a lot about it. Is there any way that art can work through something that's equivalent to a scientific process? And I should give you a little sideways background on that, I've been very involved in developing the idea of doctorates, PhDs, in practical art. And almost all the models that we have for doctoral studies are based around scientific methods, one way or another. And so, I've thought quite a lot about it. And again, to be as close to truthful as I can, I still don't think I know the answer to that. But there are some interesting ways of thinking. So let's now go on. Examples, these are examples for discussion. Leonardo da Vinci, obvious. These are drawings by Leonardo, anatomical drawings, and this, believe it or not, is the optical system. I'm destroying the hardware here. Well, that's clearly science. What Leonardo is doing there is science. But it's not art. Right? There's no symbolic element in that. He's an artist who's doing science. He also was an artist who did technology. He was an inventor. But remember that at the time when Leonardo was working, there wasn't really a distinction between art, science, and technology. Nobody had made that distinction because all of the scientific work was done at that level which was related to human observation. You didn't, on the whole, need sophisticated equipment to do the scientific work. So here, Leonardo switched between being a scientist, a technologist, and an artist. When he's making the Mona Lisa, that's nothing to do with technology, right? So he switched between them. But each time he was working in those fields, he was working in a different kind of mindset. He wasn't working in the same mindset. How he coped with that, I've no idea. I suppose that's why he wrote backwards, wrote in mirror writing to kind of be able to cope with all the different ways in which he was thinking. I don't know. Anyway, that's Leonardo. And it's obviously you couldn't have a lecture about art and science without reference to Leonardo. Claude Monet, we come back to the same picture. As I said, Monet said he wasn't influenced by science at all. But if we're looking for an approach to art practice that has something of the discipline of a scientific process, I actually think Monet's, particularly the Rouen Cathedral series, is actually a semi-scientific process. Not perfect, not pure, but it's scientific in the sense that he's making comparisons between one thing and another. And out of those comparisons, artistically, there begins to emerge some general principles. Not general principles that are translated into literary form, but into scientific principles within art, in art's own terms. So there's a little bit of science there. I suppose the other apology should have been that I'll show a fairly large amount of my own work, which is, I don't know why, maybe I'm just an egotist, or maybe it's just because it's easy to get to. And while I was thinking about this lecture, I remembered something that I'd done whilst I was a student at the Slade, I think in about 1963, 64. I got very interested in topology, which is a branch of mathematics. And everyone knows the Moebius strip, right? It's where the surface is continuous on both the inside and the outside, which is fascinating. It's continued to fascinate people, the Moebius strip, because it seems to be something where the two sides are in fact one. And I don't, I'm not quite, but so I got interested in this, and I also had a sculptor friend who was interested in topology, and I got interested in this figure, which is called the cross-cap sphere. I didn't know it was called that when I got interested in it, but basically, can I put this down for a moment? Basically, it's a sphere where the top half is crossing, right? That's what it is. You can't quite see it from that, but so it's a topological form, which is a sphere, but so it's kind of equivalent to a three-dimensional form of the Moebius strip. So I got interested in this, and I made myself a small model of this in plasticine. Plasticine, I don't know whether it's the same word and I coloured 8 segments of it in different colors. So then I thought, okay, I'm now going to explore, which I did with a pin, all of the possible elegant pathways that went through all 8 segments of this. No sense to it. I don't know why I did it. No idea why I did it, but I got interested in this idea of the pathways, the elegant pathways. And so from that, here's my drawings. These are drawings from the time. And what I was doing with the pin, I was working my way through here and then annotating for myself all the pathways I could find by tracing this with the pin. Okay? Now this is beginning, in a way, it's a scientific process. It's not intuitive. And then, when I had done this, I schematized, I laid it all out in these little diagrams about the pathways. And you can see I found dozens and dozens of these things. And I thought, I suppose at one point I thought, there may be 20 or 30. Anyway, I did this, and there were all these pathways. And when I schematized it and got it laid out, I discovered that I'd missed some from the schematization. Now again, if you know science, the periodic scale worked like that. You know the periodic scale of elements. The periodic scale was defined, and after it's defined, people said, oh, there should be another one here, and there should be another one there. And then they looked for it and they discover it. And the same happened with me when I was doing this. So these are just the diagrams. Okay, so nothing special. It's just an example of, if we're thinking what's the relationship between art and science, the question, and it stays a question, is there any kind of sensible way where we can relate scientific process, not scientific knowledge, scientific process to the process of working in art? And I leave it as a question because I don't know the answer. But I think there's elements of that, and particularly it's in developing ideas about PhDs, doctorates. You have to somehow question what sort of processes in the artistic practice can satisfy the academic, and it is academic. But not all science is academic. Anyway, there we go. Art and technology. As I said, most of what is thought of as combining art and science are actually art and technology. Again, obvious. I tried to think what would be the early examples of art and technology. Well, obviously, mathematics and engineering technologies in architecture, very early on. If you look at Gaudi and see the sorts of devices that he used, which were very much to do with engineering, in the service of architecture as an artistic and creative process. Musical instrument design. We tend not to think about it very much, but from the earliest sitar and guitar and piano and harpsichord, the music that you can make is significantly shifted by the technology of the musical instrument. And then again, a fairly obvious one in the Renaissance period, optical devices, the lens, other optical devices, working out the picture plane. We all know those. I don't need to go back to that. So in the modern period, the first stage is the fusion of art and the machine. And remember again that, you know, the Industrial Revolution, the major revolution in human culture was related to this development of sophisticated machinery that had driving forces like steam, but also then later the internal combustion engine. And we tend to, because we live in the world as it is now, we tend to forget what a huge jump that was at the end of the mid to the end of the 19th century. It changed our life in much the way that now the internet changes our life. And we don't see how it changes our life, it just does. But in art you do see it, I think. Dynamics, movement and time. I only just put this slide in because I thought, you know, actually one of the major things is that the shift through the technology assisted that development in art, which was aware of dynamics, movement, and time, where art, certainly sculpture and painting, had been not a time-based activity. But again, if you can put your mind back into that period, people like Man Ray, and they were absolutely fascinated by the speed of the motor car, the speed of rail travel. Speed became something that was for the artist and a symbol for modernity. So really important. And so you get this desire for a fusion of some sort between the machine and artistic activity as part of that thing of dynamics, movement, time. Kinetic sculpture. Okay. I'm going to show some bits of video. I hope it works. One of the first bits of, and I think it relates obtusely to these much more sophisticated installations that we see here, you know, which couldn't happen without certain kinds of technology. The early phases of that are, for example, in the kinetic sculpture. So let me see if I can manage to do this with, I'm going to show a film that Maulinage made of a piece of sculpture which was rotating and lit, and more recent works by Len Lai, and photography in the machine Ballet Mécanique. And I've got to come out of PowerPoint to do this, so let me see if I can do this without too much. I need my glasses. This should do it. Oh, amazing. These are three beautiful pieces of Len Lai that, why are we looking at that, not the Maulinage? Never mind. These are more recent than the Maulinage. These were shown recently in can't work out how to switch the light off. Beautiful sound and physical sculptural pieces. They were shown recently in Birmingham and the Icon Gallery. Oh, yeah. Shown recently at the Icon Gallery in Birmingham. For me, Len Lai is one of the most important film artists and sculptors. Not as well known as he should be. But simple mechanical technology. No feedback, nothing like interactivity. With a bit of luck, we'll go straight into the Maulinage. Oh, actually, we're doing this the wrong order. Hang on a minute. I'll come out and see why we haven't got the Maulinage. I'll come back to that. I can't find it. Never mind. We'll go straight into the Ballet Mécanique. Oh no, there it is. There's the Maulinage. Let's have a look at it. Maulinage was pretty much involved with the Bauhaus. This is all historical stuff. It's unfortunately. It's not quite as well known as a background for it's a silent work, for the kind of work which has come from it in later years. And I've seen this piece as a physical sculpture. This is a film that he made from it. And it is these metal plates, highly reflective, on a rotation, complicated rotation, but lit so that it throws a shadow on the wall. And so he made a film, which is a freestanding film. I don't think it's as interesting as a film as it is as a piece of sculpture. So that's the Maulinage. And the film's called Schwarz-Weiß-Grau, black-white-grey. And we'll go now to the there we go. Right. Right, I'm just going to stop it there. I'm not showing you the whole of Ballet Mécanique. If you want to see it, it's not so hard to see. It was really nice, the opportunity to do this presentation. That for years I've intended to put the music track, which is Georges Antiel's Ballet Mécanique, which was composed to be played with a live orchestra at the presentation of the Léger film, and I happened to find a fairly good copy of the music. It's not that hard to find, and so I was able to make a combination of the two. They don't quite fit in length. The Antiel is quite a lot longer than it's a freestanding piece. So again, be aware that what you've seen, I've put the music onto that, which is the original music composed for the film. So we'll move on now, because that's those are all those things look quite dated, but Ballet Mécanique by Léger. Just again remember that this was a celebration of this excitement of the modern. And the modern was embodied in the idea of the machine, and curiously in the idea of the factory. You know, and there was a lot of different viewpoints on repetitious behavior that comes for the people who worked in factories. The whole idea, there's the whole idea of whether this is actually an advance, because human beings become part of the machine, and you get a lot of films that actually see this not just as a way forward in the modernity, but also as a threat. And we've had similar kinds of responses to the idea of the digital, as it happens. You know, I've shown digital work, and people say, you know, the digital is undermining humanity. And, you know, that was, that sort of idea was also there in the time of the machine. And of course, in this fantastic sequence where the woman comes up the stairs in repetition, which I think is one of the most important bits of film history, where the idea of the loop and the reference back to the mechanical nature of cinematography and to the machine nature of its effect on human beings, all that comes up in this. Anyway, move on. Part two. There we go. Just in passing, not a fantastically important idea, but just in passing, because my interest is primarily around cinematic, and the way that the cinematic, now so much of our technologies, including the mobile phone and so on, are aspiring to the condition of cinema. I won't go too far into that. But I wanted to see if I could identify distinct phases in the development of cinematic-related technologies. And they're not just about cinema, they're also about the internet and so on. So the three phases, one again, very obvious, the photo and mechanical. Photography, chemical photography, and it's linked to the machine, gives us cinematography with the Lumiere. This is a combination of those two very much end of the 19th century concepts of technologies. The next phase is the magnetic and the mechanical. Big shift, actually, in one way, that the image or whatever is not recorded on photochemical form, but in magnetic form. And magnetic, if you think about it, is incredibly important in all of our technologies for recording image, recording everything now. The trace that there is in the magnetic emulsion, and when you go onto a subway, you swipe a magnetic card. The magnetic is really important, and we don't actually think about it very much. The importance of so the magnetic and the mechanical is video. The piece which I was showing just before the lecture started, which was not intended as part of the lecture, that was made entirely by analog mechanical video. It was not in any way digital. And that period, the mechanical video, when we used tapes, and they were driven by machines. And then the next one is a really major paradigm shift, the solid state non-sequential magnetic, which is digital. That's, I mean, I almost can't say how significant that is, particularly this idea of the solid state. And we've only just about reached this. I'm not using for this presentation anything that involves mechanical rotation. Okay, all the files here are on the actually they are on the hard drive, but they don't have to be. I can put the same things onto a memory stick, right? And we're now in the slight interim phase, but we're into the solid state where memory is not doesn't have any mechanical rotating forms. Okay, and the significance of that is it's non-sequential. The film strip and the magnetic video strip are sequential. You have to go through it in sequential order. Now, this is a sophisticated idea, but it's really an important one. For the computer in the solid state form, there is no linearity. If you can think of the storage of information in a computer, the address location 1 is no closer to the address location 2 than it is to the address location 2000. There's no distance between them. So in the digital form, those things to do with linearity, to do with sequentiality, and if you want to take the argument further, into narrativization and to story and so on, they open up the question of the non-linear. Now, we talk about non-linear editing, but we don't actually think about what the implications of that are. And hopefully, the last piece which I'll show you will give you some of my direction in looking at this kind of condition of the non-linear. So those are 3 phases, and I actually also had a 4th phase, and I'm not sure if it's a 4th phase or not. We're now into something that is not specifically digital media. We're into this thing of what I've called hybrid media, and I don't think I'm alone in calling it that, and I'm not even sure if it's the right term. And the hybrid media is a stage, in a sense, where we can bring together almost anything we can think of to bring together. Right? We don't have to do it entirely in the digital. We don't have to do it entirely in the film. We can bring together all those different forms, not only of producing something, but of distributing it, how it's going to be going to the audience. The internet opens up all sorts of things. And again, just to give you something of a background to this. One of the key events, which anyone who's interested in this, again, this is dynamics, movement, time, and performance. One of the key events, which if you don't know about it, it really ought to be at the center of any history of the kind of work which we're seeing here now. It's the 9 evenings of engineering and theater and engineering, which took place in New York Armory in 1966. This was an initiative that came from a person called Billy Clover, who started he was a electronics engineer in Bell Telephones, and he was very interested in art and was very friendly with John Cage and Robert Rauschenberg, and he set up an organization which was called EAT, Electronics, Art and Technology. And he was a very strange person. I interviewed him in the early 1960s about his ideas of electronics, art and technology, and what he had in mind for it. And I also chaired a panel in Leeds where he was invited to come and talk, and he was in his late 80s. He was hellish difficult, really a difficult person, and couldn't keep his temper and so on. But he was an incredibly important person, and he, with a number of other artists, set up this collaboration with people like Rauschenberg, but with Jasper Johns and lots of the New York artists, to have them produce works that were in collaboration with technologists, and they worked together, and mostly it was electronics and not digital. One of the things that Clover was very difficult about was when somebody asked him a question about the digital, and he said it was nothing to do with the digital, and it wasn't. It was all electronics. But it's a very important event. They've recently published a set of DVDs. I haven't seen them, but I saw some of the work in progress of the 9 evenings. So anyone who's interested in the academic aspect of this, it's worth having a look at that. Performance. And again, I don't know how this fits in. It's sort of hybrid. This is a performance work that I started doing in 1971. I do it regularly. I just did it in New York in a sort of festival called Performa. And if you can imagine, look at me, I'm not the right person to do it anymore. But basically, this was a work that where I think I might show a clip from it, so I won't go into it too much. But performance is not about technology. In a way, this was about, in one sense, was about technology, but it was the performance relationship to technology. And performance is old as the hills. It goes to the Greek theater and people in African dance and so on. So I don't know quite where this fits, but if we're talking about the question of the spectator and the engagement of the spectator, we have to take into account some of those things which are to do with performance, and performance as it relates to theater, as it relates to social rituals, and so on. So it isn't just about technology, I think. Oh, this is did I do that already? This is also a piece which I just did in New York as well. This is a performance which I started in 1973, and it was then a 6-screen film piece, one way or another based around image of the Mona Lisa. I won't go into that in any detail. And here, this is a performance where I'm working with a musician called Keith Rowe. And then, so the other factor then that comes up in performance is this whole territory of improvisation. You know, you do something and you don't quite know where it's going to go. And where that leaves the spectator, they don't know where it's going to go. Perhaps the biggest influence on my artistic ideas comes from jazz, which is all about improvisation. And it's that thing of the kind of the energy of the present, you know, the thing that is, you're in that moment where not anything can happen, but you don't know what's going to happen. You don't have, you know, I might collapse in a minute. You'd say, oh, I might drop the microphone. I might decide I've had enough of this and walk out. You know, and that's performance. Is you're always on that knife edge, and that knife edge is important for the relationship of the people who are watching, and they become part of that social ritual which comes from performance. And it's not to do with technology. It can interface with technology, but it isn't fundamentally about technology. Right, now I'm going to show some video again, I think, if I can do it. If I only knew what I was going to show. Videos 2. Yeah, I was going to, yes, I didn't, yeah, that's right. It should be working. Yeah. This is, it's an indulgence to show you this. I should be showing you work by other people, but I happen to have this, and it's a good, what you can see here are 3 projectors. They just have colored loops. They're changing colored loops. I'll hide that. I don't do it with no clothes on now. But I do. I have to. I have to do the torso is bare, but I wear trousers, protecting the audience from at least the worst bit of the horror. And this is what happens: is that I begin right at the screen. The projectors are at the back of the space. And I gradually work back, making actions which, one way or another, are to do with the shadow on the screen. And because each projector has a changing color loop, and there's a parallax between them, you get this very complex color effect. Which is just produced by the shadows. And so I work gradually back from the screen until we get to the projectors, and then I'm interrupting the projectors directly. We'll skip a bit of this, I think, because the documentation is not the same thing as the performance. Let's skip along a bit. Cut to the chase. So there you go. And this is the same, the Leonardo performance with Keith Rowe. Again, I'm only going to show a fragment of this. Plus 9. Okay, so this is a performance, but it's not interactive. You know, we have here a piece which is interactive. The work is responding to what you as the spectator is doing in your relationship to the screen. This isn't an interactive piece in that sense, although I always, in the performances in the past, gave people a text, which is a text from Freud's treatise on Leonardo, and I'd give them a microphone and they read it. Not truly interactive. I'm still in that sense behaving like a sort of old-fashioned filmmaker or theatre person. So it's not truly interactive. I've done a couple of interactive pieces, which I showed again a little bit before people arrived, which I'm not going to show now. But I've never really explored the possibilities of the interactive. And again, discussing this with Eve earlier today, my excuse is that though I've written about interactivity and I'm very interested in the interactive, I want to avoid that game structure in order to get at more fundamental emotional and intellectual content. I don't know if that makes any sense, and I'm not sure. Again, as I said to you, I'm never sure about those things. The biggest characteristic of me and my work is that it's always doubtful. So here we go. What's next? All right. Oh yeah, this is the main bit of the. Oh, heavens. Right. This is the main bit of the lecture. I reckon it's gone on long enough, but I'll have a go at it. This goes back again into the historical questions and tries to see something of the concepts. The spectator. So the question of the spectator. We're looking at presence, interaction in the physical and social, cultural context. That is to do with a mainstay of my theoretical discussions right from the beginning when I first made films, together with my friend Peter Godal and a couple of other people, was the switch from the artwork being centered around the maker to being centered around the spectator. And it was kind of a moral, political stance, a little bit romantic. It was also about equality. It was and I still hold the idea that it's when I show a work of film or video work, I don't want the audience to spend their time trying to work it out what I was thinking, right? It's like, I like the idea that the work is something you throw into a pond and it ripples out. And the ripples belong to the people who are watching it. And they construct the meaning in presence, and the presence leading to their future, right? It leads to their future. It's a future that exists in the public and cultural space. And it's not about trying to decode what it was that I'm thinking, or even my psychology. And of course it's very difficult, because when you make a work, it's impossible not to be working outwards from your psychology. You have no alternative. I can't possibly make any decision when I'm putting a work together that isn't based on my experience and my psychology. So this shift to the spectator is not a simple activity. And okay, there's some other thoughts about that, but I won't go into them. So this begins from where I started to think about this, in art history again, pictorial and temporal viewpoint, space and time, perspective, narrative. And it for me begins with Cézanne. Very interesting for me, Cézanne. There was an English artist, Paul Sickert, said he thought Cézanne was very good, but a pity he couldn't draw, right? Well, it's nonsense, because what Cézanne is doing is facing a conflict. He didn't know how to cope with it, but he had a conflict. The conflict was that the expectation was that the world would be represented in painting in conventional quattrocento perspective, with vanishing points and with diminution of the image. But Cézanne didn't see things like that. Cézanne knew that this apple here was the same size as the one that was back here, right? He knew that they weren't smaller. They didn't get smaller as they went back in perspective. And it was a conflict, because he knew the rules of perspective. He knew that he was expected as an artist to work with those, but his instincts were telling him that something was wrong with that. Not only was this issue of diminution a problem for Cézanne, but Cézanne was moving all the time. And so he gets a problem with, where does the edge of something come? And you know, if you look at a Cézanne painting, there's all kinds of inconsistencies. The line of one thing doesn't match up with the same thing that's further in the picture, and it's all full of inconsistencies. Now, those inconsistencies were not to do with his inability. They were to do with a very fundamental conflict between the convention of perspective and how he sees. And it's not just his personal seeing, it's a philosophical question, as well as, it's not just an artistic question, it's a philosophical question, which actually undermines the idea that we see in perspective. We've persuaded ourselves that we see in perspective, but we don't. I don't see you as smaller because you're there, right? And if we have a relationship with each other, I even more don't see you as smaller because you're there, right? And now you don't get smaller as I back away. So my seeing is a combination, my experience of the world is a combination of my three-dimensional experience, my touch, and if you read Jean Piaget, for example, you see how children build up their physical concept of the world, and it's not perspective. Perspective is a clue. If you're driving, you can, perspective is a sort of clue, but it's not the way things are, and it's not the way we experience them. So Cézanne really took this, he didn't take it on, he just couldn't avoid it. And he wasn't a great theorist about it. He talked about all his theoretical things about the cube and the sphere and so on, which were fairly much nonsense in relationship to what was actually going on. And then again, it's standard art history, but this led to the breakup in a dramatic way of the conventions of perspective. And what's happening actually is that the time factor is coming into the spatial relationship. For Picasso and the Cubists, they became aware that, if they've got a person sitting here, they can go around the back and they can go around the side. And so, and particularly with the Futurists and Duchamp, for example, they're looking for a way in the static visual representation for dealing with the issue of a temporality, with space and time being connected. Now, of course, there's a whole relationship to science in this concept of space-time, but that's not where they started. They were working on their instincts about how it was that the world was A, constructed, and B, how they could represent it in the static form. And Boccioni, you know, a piece of sculpture, which is a multi-viewpoint piece of sculpture. It's a terrible piece of sculpture, actually, but it's actually fantastic. I encountered it properly for the first time in Venice recently, and it's a super piece. It's so wrong, you know, because it's partly still in the same form of a figure, but it's also, you know, broken up, and but it's a struggle. This is one of the interesting things about about this modern period, is the work is not perfect. It's a struggle. It's always trying to bring things together which don't fit together. And so that element of conflict and struggle, what I call problematics, becomes central to art activity. It's not a perfect representation of the world. It's a sort of proposition of representation with conflict. Things don't quite fit together, you know, the ideas don't quite fit. And so it's, I would say, perhaps embodying something of a really true scientific standpoint, which is doubt, which is not the idea that you have got it, you know, that it's not perfect. And of course, I think in science, you know, this continual attempt to find unifying principles in the world, they never quite make it, you know. But they're driven by doubt and uncertainty. They're not driven by certainty and instinct. I'm just going to show a couple of video things. One, if we've got time, I'm going to show you a 15-minute piece. This is just extracts from a installation I did at Tate Modern last year, 2010, of a 6-screen piece called Finity, which is about 40 minutes. I'll show you some excerpts of that, which is a spectacle as much as anything, and then even a Cyclops pace, the ferryman. What I've been trying to do for the last 10 or 15 years is a project which I've called the Chronos project, just for my own sake. What it's trying to do is to see the temporal construction of cinema, the passage through the images, through the sequences, as being a matrix, that the components of this, memories or documentations or whatever you like to think of them as existing not in a single linearity, but existing simultaneously in a matrix, where the video is a passage through that matrix. And I use multi-projection, multi-screen, to indicate that in every condition, in every case, there's alternative ways of going through that material and constructing it. So in a sense, it's a sort of model for the psychological construction of our memory, right? And I call it a matrix structure. I haven't, as with everything else, I haven't got it thoroughly worked out. It's a kind of concept and an idea which goes along with completely intuitive choices and so on. So it's not perfect. But if you can bear with it, I'm just going to show these last couple of bits of video. But the main one, this one, is 15 minutes long. And it was made as a requiem for the death of my father. And it's not a religious work. It's very much a materialist work. So there we go. And that then is the end, and we can drink, hopefully. Let's have a look. Videos 3. Right, we can have the lights off. You'll be pleased to know that the lecture is finished. And thank you very much for putting up with all my nonsense. Stefan, Wouter, Alexandra, enjoyed your show very much, and it makes me look like a very old-fashioned artist. But yes, very nice show, and thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you very much for inviting me, and we're into drinking time, aren't we? I hope.
Well, thanks a lot, Malcolm. I don't know, it depends if there's people who want to ask questions or if we just do it at the bar. What do you prefer, at the bar?
Put some lights on so that we can see people. Yeah, I don't particularly want to answer questions. If people want to make any statements, say something, that's fine. Or we can we drink some beer?
Yeah, of course.
We can, and then, you know, I'm here and you can talk to me. But if you want to say something, yes, I got a question.
One question. At one point you mentioned that you didn't want to go into the game aspect of
yes.
interaction. I didn't get that.
Well, I don't know either. It's just philosophically, my ideas about the Spectator and the digital led me to the concept of interactivity, where the spectator, the user, was as important as the artist, right? And you can see it in people like Geoffrey Shaw, and I don't know if you know the work, but the Karlsruhe group, all of that development of interactivity does interest me, yeah? And I did one piece which we looked at earlier today, which was an abstract audio-visual synthesizer, which you could play, and it's an interactive piece. But interactivity itself actually seems to hold people, the spectator's behavior, actually inside a very technological framework, right? And though I like it, and I think if I had another life, I might well start to produce interactive works. But for the moment, I got so much junk stuff in here, artistic ideas that I want to follow through that are related to what now is a form of non-interactive visual work, like the piece we've just seen, where the spectator's relationship is to do with reconstruction, reconstruction of a space that's both physical and psychological and emotive. And I want to work in that territory, but that's personal. Okay, there's nothing about what is correct to do if you were an artist now. If I was starting as an artist now, no doubt I should probably follow up some form of interactive idea. And I am a bit concerned that a lot of it gets stuck in this game structure which we have, you know, through the game that all the kids play, and you know, and which actually hooks you into the shoot 'em up psychology often. And I'm against that as well, and I'm against the violence of Hollywood movies, and you know, I don't want to see any of that. I want to create a different way of thinking. So that's best I can do. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Michael. Let's go to the bar.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming.